I've heard a lot of talk online where people say, you should really get a gigging amp, or, how much watts do you really need and all of that stuff. And even though some of them are actually respectable retailers and some of them actually make guitars, I think they're still wrong, because even though that some of them actually tried even truckloads of equipment, they still basically live in this world where you are within a room with a band and, there's a loud drummer playing and you have no PA. Now, let me tell you, the world has changed. A gigging amp is an amp made for gigging. Is it tube driven or valve driven, as they say in England, or Vollrohre, as they say in Germany? Is it solid state? Is it a hybrid amp, a modeling amp, a profiling amp? It actually doesn't matter. Well, how much watts do you actually need for gigging? Well, it all depends on where are you gigging at. If you have a PA and a decent monitoring system in front of you, you don't actually need an amp. You can use like a multi-effects pedal or a Kemper or a Line 6 pod, which I actually don't recommend, but you could use it. You could use a Tech 21 Sans amp or any of the other products that, basically have a complete sound to them, Actually, it's the same with bass. So you don't actually have to lug around all of these heavy and usually pretty expensive, bass cabinets and other gear. It also depends a lot on, the room or the guy who is in front of you doing the front of house mix. It has to do with the gear that, the front of house sound guy has on tap, and or the amount of will or, effort that he is willing to put into making your band sound really good. If you have a monitor system and if your drummer has a monitor system, then basically you don't have to use any speakers on stage except for your monitors. So the term gigging amp actually isn't correct. Say if you're in a kind of a loud rock band, say like an AC/DC kind of a band. You have a loud drummer and you have, a guitar player that plays a heavily or kind of a crunchy or a heavily distorted sound. And you have a bass player that's also quite loud. And if all of you guys are playing within the same room, you need to have a louder amp, because you don't have the monitor system that you would normally have on stage now, because it's 2018 currently. The thing is that you, as a guitar player, need to be loud because you have a loud drummer right next to you that's really like pounding on his drums and cymbals, and that creates a whole like wash of frequencies and all of that stuff, and you need to hear yourself through all of that noise. But on the other hand, because the drummer is actually making all of that noise, he actually needs to hear you so he knows when to play and to be on time. That's why you need kind of a loud amp within a room that you practice. But if you're smart and don't buy like, tons and tons of gear and like heavy expensive speakers, then you can actually get a decent sound by using trickery. And if you have monitors or in-ears, you can actually have a much better rehearsal. You won't get that ear fatigue, your ears won't be ringing, and you can actually devote your efforts to making your songs sound better. The thing is that for some venues you actually do need to have an amp, because those venues oftentimes they're like pubs or bars or something. They don't have any expensive equipment. They maybe have like 2 PA boxes and that's it. These are usually designated for the singer, and you need to have acoustic drums and you need to have real amps in order to produce sound, and you're kind of competing with the drums and with the PA and everything, and that's the way it was a long time ago. But now if you're in a band and you're like looking to actually play and tour, you might want to reconsider all of that stuff and all of that gear, because it's really not necessary. You're creating many different problems. Every venue is sort of specific, and actually none of them are acoustically treated in a way that it would please the band and the audience. It's usually just a room that has stuff in it, and there's a PA there, and the front of house mixer is, really in an awkward position and can't really hear what's going on. That being said, if you put a lot of like speakers on stage, like a 4x12 cab, and you really gun it and everything, the microphone won't pick it up. You're gonna have a lot of stage noise that's gonna hit the crowd, and that's not really beneficial. A lot of these front of house sound guys that actually know the place are gonna tell you not to point the speakers at the audience, but they're gonna tell you to point the speakers at the stage. You actually need to carry all of that stuff to the venue, so you need to have a van, or you need to have like multiple cars. You need to have help in order to bring that stuff out of the van and to the stage. If there are multiple bands playing, then you need to kind of work with them in order to place your gear on stage next to their gear, and then some of them are going to ask you to use your gear, and that can create like a whole plethora of different problems. If you have a big band, then all of that gear is quite heavy. You're basically torturing the van, you're taking up space in the van, you're using space in the venue on stage, and that's just not necessary. Yeah, but I have that specific sound that I really need and I want. Don't give me that bullshit, because it's not true. You know that you can get exactly the same sound from gear which is digital. If Metallica uses XFX, then so can you, including your little bullshit, metal gore, grindcore, whatever band. And I actually get why guitar players use huge amps, they use huge speaker cabinets, they use, big pedal boards and all of that stuff. It gets your hard. They are all show-offs. It's like buying a convertible and saying, oh, look at me, I have a convertible. By having expensive gear on stage, it makes them feel more confident, and other people and other guitar players can see, oh my god, these guys brought a whole bunch of gear on stage. They must be rich, or they know their shit. But that actually doesn't mean that they can play. And all of that expensive gear doesn't actually mean that they're gonna sound good. And all of that expensive gear doesn't actually mean that their band is gonna sound any good. And even if their band sounds good, it doesn't really matter, because their songs are shit. So in conclusion, gigging amps are an outdated term, because if you play live on stage with a monitoring system, you don't actually need an amp. If you have in-ears, you don't actually need an amp. And if you have a monitor system and you use an amp, you can use a 10-watt amp, a 10-watt transistor amp with a good speaker. Or you can use a small tube amp. You don't need a 100-watt head or a 400-watt solid-state head. You don't need 4x12s. You can just use a 1x12 or a 1x10 and mic it up with a decent microphone, not like your generic SM57 that you can buy for $100 at any music store, and get a way better sound than if you have a 100-watt, tube head. Doesn't matter if it's Marshall, Mesa, or whatever, a 4x12 like an Engel cab, or a Mesa cab or a Marshall cab, and you're gonna mic up all of that gear with a $100 microphone. The wattage of a specific amp is actually relevant because it only kind of denotes the headroom that the amp has. And if you don't know what headroom is, you probably don't need a lot of it. Be smart when you're buying your gear, and actually buy good gear. And if you think you need it, invest in your monitor system. Buy gear that you need. Don't lug around heavy equipment. Your back is gonna be thankful, and your bandmates are gonna be thankful. On this channel, I'm gonna feature some more like gear recommendation, all of that stuff. And if you know of a topic that I might cover in one of the following videos, just leave your ideas in the comments below. Life is too short to listen to bad music, and me and Albert are actually signing out. Adios, guys.